Hello, and thank you for taking time to join us for the first Top Trends in Fresh of 2024. I'm Kelly Krumholz, joined by my Circana colleague, Jonna Parker, and Rick Stein of FMI. As always, we have a great many insights and content to share with you today in our short time together, and we are so excited to get started. Some housekeeping before we begin. Please add any of your questions into the chat Q&A. We will address those at the end if there's time. As well, there will be an email shared following this webinar with a link to the presentation and the deck. So let's look at our agenda for the day here. So our theme today is all about seizing opportunities. We want to take a moment before we get too deep to level set and review performance over the last 4 years. As well, we will touch base on what is an outlook for 2024 for all of food and beverage, along with our key fresh departments. From there, we want to double-click into some key factors that we think are shaping the landscape today, really about how we eat and how we shop differently and why it matters. We want to explore these important shifts and understand how to best capitalize on them now and in the future. Since 2017, we have been tracking key macro trends impacting the fresh perimeter departments. These macro trends take years to build, and they're not static. They evolve over time. And over the last 4 years, we have gone through some fundamental shifts that reshape how we think about these fresh trends. You know, we can think about the pandemic like it's a catalyst or an accelerator. How I like to think about it is that it's a prism or a lens that is redimensionalizing how we see the world. What seems to be straightforward is more complex. There are more aspects to consider, and which fresh trends are guiding light as we move out of the inflation and into what's next. As well, what are the emerging microtrends that will be foundational macro trends tomorrow? We live in interesting times, so let's dig in.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Jonna Parker. Just wanted to thank Kelly there for the kickoff. So we are going to move pretty fast. One other thing we want to mention is that the download that will be made available via email and on our insights page will be have probably more slides than we're going to get to show today. So if you didn't see something, odds are it's there. But let me go ahead and talk about how we've been seeing price change and how it is not necessarily correlated with inflation. So from this chart, you can tell that, yes, inflation rates have started to ease in the last several quarters after peaking during the end of 2022. And I should say this is total food and bev across retail. But what's really interesting is when you compound that into actual index of change since 2019 of what people are paying, that pink line and the fact that there is a gap between that and how wages have also increased during this period is truly the undercurrent, as Kelly said, of everything we're looking at here. Now, for one brief moment, we are going to go beyond retail food and beverage. Here at Circana now, we have the power and availability to track literally all consumer goods across different retail sectors. When we do so, while of course we're going to talk a lot today about the unit decline that retail food and beverage saw in 2023 versus 2022. But for a little bit of context before we dive deep into our talk today, take a look at how the dollar and unit volume change look different across the many different things that consumers can choose to spend their hard-earned money on. And obviously, then we don't look so bad from a decline standpoint. And actually, the fact that we were positive last year in dollars is pretty remarkable. Now, the one piece of context, prestige beauty is a category, the only category of all consumer goods in 2023 that saw a unit increase. And I wanted to bring this up today for the Fresh Foods audience because what prestige beauty is doing so well is resonating with consumers on needs and relevance in their everyday life. You have older consumers who, of course, are investing more in skincare and looking great in later ages. You also have a lot of younger consumers who are discovering makeup and trying different things. A lot of it's digitally influenced, a lot of it's availability. But all of it points to consumer demand, even in an inflationary environment with tough wage growth, can still drive unit increases. And really, some of the great work that Rick and his team from FMI have done summarizes this so well. So this slide is truly an important one to remember. When it comes to what we've learned so far in the 2020s, value is more than price. And as Kelly, Rick, and I go through the insights today on where we shop and how we eat, keep in mind that you are going to see time and time again that in addition to price, which is absolutely the color and the lens with which consumers are looking at their food purchases today, it's really about quality. And quality for them may mean certain attributes of sustainability or wellness. It doesn't mean the freshest, because I'm here to tell you guys, everyone's saying their stuff is the freshest. Quality is actually about what uniquely is different about your product or your store. Relevance, experience, and of course convenience are also equally at play. You'll hear us say these 4 words throughout today, and I'm sure you'll find increasingly throughout our data that they continue to ring true. Price is important, but so are these pieces as well. So let's jump into the retail food and bev outlook. And again, this section, especially in the download, is much more in-depth. And I also invite you to reach out to your Circana team or your FMI contacts, because any of the data we're about to share to you, there's a lot more behind the story that we're going to hit the highlights like a great little news report here. Eventually, we'll TikTok this. It's kind of my joke. So when we looked at our January and last couple of months of our consumer shopper survey, where we're consistently asking people how they're reacting to the certain climate that's happening that month, guess what? I showed you that inflation was coming down, but 94% of households in January 2024 still say food cost inflation is a concern. 70% have noticed it actually feeling harder in the last 3 months. People don't look at year over year. They look at the shelf. They look at their own wallets, just like these pictures show. We've also seen that price increases have started to come down, yet 76% of people still say that they feel that they're going up. Perception's reality. And the most interesting and different thing that we have seen in the last couple of months, and especially in January 2024, is the bifurcation of who is most concerned and making changes. And by that, I mean, sorry, making sure you all can still hear me. By that, I mean that when it comes to how you're managing or making changes, it's actually the Gen Zs and millennials that are ultimately the ones who are now saying, the majority of which are making changes. But we also know that younger consumers are also the most concerned in their future. Why I bring this up is I think so much of our dimensions of how we think about price and its impact to what we buy is rooted in thoughts that are very much anchored in how baby boomers and Gen Xers behave. But the fact that the youngest generation is the most concerned, and we're going to show you today, they also buy different things than the older generations. We really need to think about what is fresh to the younger consumers beyond price, because I'll tell you, they're not just reacting by not buying as much. They're buying what is quality and relevant and convenience and experience to them. So a couple quick stats from our broader Circana. Overall, we can measure with actual point of sale data the retail and away, the at home and away from home balance. And in our data, what we've seen through 2023 is that 61% of dollars generated in food, macro food landscape, retail, and food service, we are seeing 61%, a consistent rate throughout 2024, being still driven from retail. Now, one quick point on food service. Our food service team has done an excellent job with some deep dives on that channel. But for context here today on Fresh, we do know that foot traffic, while not where it was pre-pandemic, is trending up at food service. We also know that when we take into account what's expected for the next several years of this decade, because we're starting to see a return of foot traffic, as well as we're starting to see a bullish and increasingly interesting market from an operator spend standpoint, we do expect an almost 3% CAGR over the next 3 years of growth. Here's the takeaway of these slides. The magic moment we've had at retail, where people have been pretty much always at retail for their food needs, is starting to change. So let's talk about retail. First and foremost, we want to take a look today at three really important time periods. The first is 2019, pre-COVID, the world as it was. Then, of course, there was the years of 2020 and 2021, which were very much colored by the pandemic, really constraining what we can do and where we can do it. And the last 2 years, absolutely, inflation colors the day. So let me animate a chart here for you. In pink, dollar sales is the actual total food and beverage spend, sales, over these 5 years. Price per unit is now up about, you see at $4 across all food and beverage. That's 32% since 2019. Units are down. More concerning, units are actually down more than they were pre-pandemic. This price shift is really starting to have an impact. I'm clicking here. Here's all the changes versus a year ago. Let's take a look at another lens with the same chart. Now we're going to look at buyer behavior. In buyer behavior, what we see is that trips are the highest they have ever been to any retail store for any food and beverage. The concept of just-in-time shopping, buying what you need when you need it, not even just because we're in this live fast society, but really to try to control how much you're spending. It's actually that we're making 14 more trips per household on average per year. That's a ton of dollars in fees going through these retail stores. But at the same time, the average U.S. household is maybe up from 2019, but obviously the units per buyer are starting to erode. People are using the more trip frequency tactic to control their spending. Let's take a look at the same kind of chart, but just for fresh foods here. Price per unit is actually in fresh up about 81 cents. I say only 24% versus 2019. But perception's reality. In our consumer work, we know that because most people know the price of certain produce, meats, bakery, deli items, the perception is that the price increases at fresh are higher than they actually are. Perception is reality. When it comes to dollar sales, we do see that fresh has gained about $53 billion, or 26%. It's a sizable amount of dollars going through these 5 fresh departments. It's a meaningful number. But units are actually up slightly than we were in 2019. Again, slightly different than we're seeing in center aisles and frozen. We are seeing that more units are actually being sold as fresh. In a minute, I'm going to show you which departments those are coming from, because it isn't that all of a sudden we're buying more of certain things. There's a very stark difference in what we're buying more of. For fresh, looking at the trips and the units, we do see similar trends to what we saw in total food and beverage. Where goes the store goes fresh. We are only seeing a 5% increase in trips in fresh. And I will tell you from our department level work, not all departments are seeing more trips. What is also interesting is we are buying more units of fresh foods than we were previously. So there certainly is an opportunity to offer the consumer more things on these more frequent trips. Depth is actually one of our biggest needs in the fresh foods departments right now. So we actually did the same analysis and have actually automated it within our Unified platform to look at any product in any geography over these 5 major time periods of the last 5 years. In short, what we found was that meat has given back their frequency, and actually trips are relatively flat from where they were pre-pandemic. Units and pounds are drifting downwards. Meat, and also if you see on the far right, seafood, where trips are at their all-time lowest, needs engagement in this more frequent world. The meat and seafood departments of today are not necessarily selling as much frequently with as many pounds as previously. Now, produce is kind of the even ground. Produce has increased in spending. It certainly had the most increase in frequency, not just of any fresh department, actually of any department in the store. But all that frequency isn't necessarily translating to deeper dollars. We're finding a lot of, pun intended, cherry picking going on in produce. Deli and bakery are arguably the most interesting and differentiated departments from where we were 5 years ago. Trips to deli are now up and spend is up. But guess what? This isn't a sudden romance with traditional service case lunch meats. This is making deli more convenient and more relevant more often through actually a lot of prepackaged items and items that don't require you to engage with a service case. Not to say those aren't needed in deli, but it's relevant and it's now more frequent. Bakery has had the highest price increase of any department. And so we've seen penetration actually increase, which is so interesting to me about this department. Bakery's price increase has really eroded units, but actually bakery has a lot of really interesting things going on, and the fact that the frequency is driven by different items on more of an everyday basis. All of this different way that we buy these 5 fresh departments has culminated in 5 years with a shift of sales and their importance to total perimeter and total store. So bakery, through this price increase, but a continued engagement of penetration and frequency, we've actually seen bakery pick up a whole share point of total fresh food sales since 2019. Deli has also gained. Produce has actually lost, whereas meat and seafood have been on an up and down roller coaster that pretty much landed back where they started. But produce having a lower dollar sales impact, but the highest frequency, brings to mind the fact that produce is an important department to drive trips, but we need that depth. Whereas bakery and deli's changes that we've seen in the items they're offering are resonating. 2 more slides here and then an outlook before we jump into the detail of how we shop and how we eat. This is a slide that looks at all edible or total food and beverage departments and anchors their sales versus 19, their volume or units depending on that department's prevailing system of unit of measure, and then price per volume versus 2019. What you see here is that the 5 fresh departments have not had exactly the same output from a sales standpoint. Meat is down, selling less pound volume than previously, but actually on a lower price increase. So it's not necessarily about the more we price meat, the less pounds people buy. It's actually about relevance and frequency and the right sizes at the right time for the right consumers. Produce has had the lowest price increase and arguably the lowest cost per item at $1.86. However, produce dollars didn't increase as much, but volume actually only increased 3%. Bakery and deli had maybe bakery was a little bit different, let's say, but ultimately each department has its own situation going on. When you compare that to things like beverages, which really have had an absolute transformation in relevancy in the last 5 years, it really puts the fresh food changes into context. Now, we always look at dollars, pounds, and price. Let's take a look at shopper behavior. So when we look at individual departments, I summarized them earlier, but the fact that we're seeing less trips to meat in purple, trips is really the metric to look at this year, everyone. Meat's lack of trips and seafood's lack of trip growth really is hurting the overall sales impact of those departments. Now, penetration of all these departments except seafood is holding relatively steady. Produce is actually a little bit lower than we might have expected, but it goes back to the fact that it is growing. Overarchingly, though, the fresh departments have been on a roller coaster, and it's actually driven more by shopper behavior changes than actual dollars and pound volume. Now, before we dive into how we shop and how we eat, a little bit of a prediction. And this is actually a slide with a new visual that we presented first in November's Top Trends in Fresh. We released in November a way of forecasting that goes so far beyond just doing a CAGR. At Circana, we can mix a variety of out-of-home and economic factors right along with our sales and shopper data. And when we do so and we project into 2024, we expect that the deli will continue to outperform total food and beverage. We also think that the beverages aisle will also do so. By the way, a lot of retailers have moved beverages around to make them even more frequent and more important. A lot of that's driving that. When it comes to the majority of fresh foods, as well as the dairy department and refrigerated in the general food center aisle, we expect them to pretty much do on par. And truly on par is meh. It's about 1% growth this year if we get to volume growth at all. Now, the meat department actually and the frozen department really do have the most work and hill to climb. Why I bring all this up is what got us to where we were in 2019 is a totally different world to where we are in 2024. And why we wanted to talk to you about how we shop and how we eat today to kick off Top Trends in Fresh is every single potential growth or decline will actually be firmly rooted in capitalizing on today's way that we shop and eat. This isn't the world of last decade. We really need new ideas. So Rick, very curious to get your take on these reporting and this news and what you're hearing from members of FMI.
Sure. Thanks, John. And thanks again for partnering with FMI on the top trends in fresh, this being our first of this year. And I know we have a lot of content to provide, so I'm going to keep my remarks kind of short. But I'm going to go back to the slide where you showed the value matrix. And what I really think is important, where we're seeing members win, is when they're able to show this value. And so we've seen what consumers are doing in the face of inflation, and they are redefining what value is. And when our members are able to be relevant with them, or add convenience to them, or create experience for them, or differentiate themselves via quality, they're winning. And so not everybody's losing in this time of low volume. There are winners, and there are categories that are winners too, because that's how consumers are thinking. So I think as I go forward, and I know you're going to get into it in the slides, I really think that our retailers and the suppliers need to be thinking about this value matrix and how do they plug and play into that.
I couldn't agree more, Rick. I think it was really relevant research. We have some amazing top trends in fresh. We said it earlier, Kelly's Prism example. It's not that the trends are changing. It's how we're applying them to our day-to-day lives as shoppers. And we have to get beyond just looking at price as the only driver. Totally agree. I'm so grateful for all of your context. It always validates when I look at data and then we chat and you see the same thing.
And it is amazing how those trends that we identified all the way back in 2017 or 15, they're still relevant. Although their story's a little different, it's amazing how they've lasted through all this change. So I thought your one slide that kind of showed the pandemic being a prism and then like what's next, those trends continue to play out, but they play a little differently. And I know you're going to touch on some of this as we go forward.
Absolutely. It's also a good time. Thank you for all the questions coming in. A couple of them, like how much of this is driven by e-com or club, we will cover that. We will also, I will say, two quick things for the chat. If you go to Circana.com, and our producer today, Joe Eckert, can probably put this in there, some good questions on frozen and also the impact of Ozempic. Our Circana broader partnership has done work in both spaces, but we're not going to cover those today. If Joe can drop the note on that, we did some hugely deep work on both of those topics. Want to make sure that you get access to that. So let's jump into how we eat. Now, a lot of people are used to me talking about retail and obviously thinking about legacy IRI from just a retail perspective. But to me, one of the most fascinating things that we can do now that we're one Circana is dive into people's kitchens, pantries, and eating occasions and literally understand the frequency, depth, use, situation with which they're eating. It's fascinating, and I'm so excited to share some of our insights on that with you today. First and foremost, again, a little bit of a plug here, but in fall 2023, the most common question, which actually is still a question I get a lot today, is, hey, retail volume is down. Is that because people are eating less? And then actually our food service clients are saying, hey, volume's increasing. Are we stealing that from retail? So we actually did a really deep study available on Circana.com, and the outcome was simply this. Retail and food service, when we now have all the data end-to-end, is not a one-for-one trade. What we did actually find is that volume loss is a complex dance that is about not wasting and buying just what you feel will sustain you or what you really love and want. And so it's not that we're overarchingly eating less as a society. By the way, even with Ozempic and GLP-1 drugs, it's had an impact on what you eat. But ultimately, Americans are still absolutely in love with food. But because we've made the prices so high and we have different dimensions of value today, how we're eating is really actually about what's relevant to us and what fits our needs. First and foremost, understand that there are 600 billion annual eating occasions that are sourced from retail. So earlier I covered the share of spending or dollar sales between food service and retail. When it comes to occasions, 86%, even 2 years after the pandemic, are still sourced from retail. and consumed from that source. So this is a trend that lasts, that people look to retail as a frequency of occasions basis. And if you do the quick math on 600 billion annual eating occasions, the numbers add up pretty quick. Then it comes again to the history of those share of occasions. Our data, which does go back even past 2016 in our consumption plan, in our consumption models, we do actually see that pre-pandemic, the share of occasions did favor at home. Think about the number of times you're just running somewhere and grab a pack of mini muffins or an apple, right? So they did peak at 88%, but we're still at a historically sustained in-home average, whereas away from home is only about 14% of the times we eat. All this should mean that retail should be doing better, frankly, than it is. Now it's an important part of us understanding what those occasions are and what drives them. One of the first and most foremost important things is how we make main meals has changed in just a few years. 39% of all main meals, we're talking where you sit down and eat, not a snack, not a grab-and-go type situation, not a beverage, right, where you're just driving and doing something. 39% of those are between 15 and 29 minutes. Also where we've seen the most growth, by the way, in the last few years. Now, what's interesting about that is the less than 5 minutes, the 30 and above, it's not that those don't happen, but they're actually a little bit less than an investment of 5 minutes to assemble something, 30 minutes to maybe cook and assemble something. But the bigger takeaway is not the time. It's actually that we're using fewer ingredients than ever. And we are seeing annual eatings of main meals go down slightly, although we're up a little bit than pre-pandemic. Ultimately, honestly, we're using fewer ingredients in 5 to 29 minutes to solve our main meal needs. Think about componentizing. Think about how you message to the fact that we don't necessarily want to do huge time investments, and we don't want to spend a lot on a ton of ingredients for complexness. One other stat that I found fascinating, because I've never been able to look at this data before, was how we're using appliances. So in the last 4 years, and this would be year ending in purple 2020, so that's basically the pre-pandemic world, right? March 2020 is when everything shut down, all the way through last year. What you see is that the stovetop and the microwave have always been the most popular and have only increased so as we've gotten away from being home during the pandemic. Oven, slight decrease actually. And one of the ones that's most interesting is all the way at the far right, multi-cooker. A lot of headway was made, and a lot of hay, I should say, was made over multi-cookers or instant pots, as it's branded, really getting really popular, but now have actually waned. Again, going back to this, people want to do something that's easy and uncomplicated, but still be successful with it. It's a little bit about time, and it's a lot about how you make it. We also know from other work we've done that the air fryer, which has had an increase in popularity in the last year, is also more predominantly popular among younger consumers, whereas the oven is more popular among older consumers. This data, by the way, we can take a specific person or household or target and actually take a look at what they're using specifically for specific foods. I mentioned we're making meals with less ingredients. We're also stocking less ingredients. There is 10% less food on hand in the average American fridge and pantry than there has ever been. And specifically in fresh, this, I argue, is one of the biggest drivers of our volume loss. People are incredibly conscious of using fresh foods before they go bad. I could have put a meme here that I've shared with a lot of friends you might have seen, which is, I wish I was the person I thought I was when I bought all this produce. It makes the rounds because we have an aspiration to cook fresher and healthier and buy things. And then when they go bad, it's literally wasted dollars. Wasted dollar hangover from spoiled food is a lot of what this is. You know, in center store and frozen, it's a lot less stock up because price can be prohibitive to do a huge pantry loading trip. But in fresh, we have to combat a shelf life and a, will I really use all of this? I know we've talked a lot about that in categories like packaged salad and lettuce. Things like in the meat department, we definitely want to make sure people feel like they can use everything that they're buying, because if they don't feel they can use it and they're just going to waste some portion or all of it, they're not going to buy it. Now, aspiration and reality, as we've said already, is two different things. When we did our 2024 New Year's resolution survey, which we do every year and have for quite a long time, more than half of shoppers, highlighted in pink here if you add them together, have some type of meal or eating or drinking change that they're doing as part of their New Year's resolution. That's pretty consistent with past years. And the most popular New Year's resolution was, I'm going to eat healthier in general. In general means I want to make choices and I want them to be overarchingly healthier. It isn't, I'm going to eat more tomatoes or I'm going to eat more beef and protein. It's literally a perception of healthier. So when that's literally been the most popular New Year's resolution 4 or 5 or, I don't know, maybe 10 years running, wouldn't you expect that the consumption, especially of fruits and vegetables, would be up? Unfortunately, when we rank the top 10 food and beverage in terms of the most frequent occasions that they're consumed, fruit is still number 2, but it's actually down year over year. Furthermore, vegetables and legumes, which is essentially the other half of fresh produce, is also down. In fact, if we look at this list of the most popular and frequently consumed foods and beverages, fresh makes appearances, but are not necessarily increasing. Now, sandwiches gaining popularity, we know we saw a lot in some of our data as a reaction to inflation. But we also saw, and you'll see in Kelly's section, that having a pre-packed sandwich ready to go that maybe had a decent shelf life also met this need and helped drive increased occasions. We have to bridge the gap between someone thinking I'm going to eat healthier and automatically assuming that means they're going to go to their local grocer and buy a ton more fresh. We have to make it easier for them and make it relevant to their needs as much as we're trying to sell the actual food for an actual price. Now, what is the opposite of the main meal phenomenon, of course, is the snacking revolution. Snacking is a lifestyle. I'm literally presenting this slide to you, which came from an incredible snacking study that we did called the Snacking Supernova last year, which was literally one of my all-time favorite presentations. What it found was that we're eating more snacks more often, and the younger you are, the more likely you are to be primarily a snacker. We talk often in the fresh foods industry about getting a little bit more relevant with millennials, Gen Zs. They're snacking. They're eating small meals. They're not necessarily doing those in-depth main meal preps. Occasion drives frequency. Frequency drives volume. That can be a huge lever about playing into this mini meals and snackability of various foods. Furthermore, if we look beyond adults today, we know that a specific cohort has become incredibly frequent and passionate drivers of snack food consumption. And by snack food consumption, I don't mean the salty snack style. I literally mean mini meals to fuel your day. Consumers aged 13 to 17, which is honestly a cohort we rarely talk about in this industry, is making a noteworthy shift. And it's translating into hundreds more eating occasions by this demographic. I love this picture that I found because it really typifies what Gen Z identifies with, having a 13 and a 17-year-old myself in the home. But note that they're drinking smoothies. Those should be fresh. So it really does start to be important that we understand different cohorts and how they're eating, because how they're eating translates into how they're shopping, and how they're shopping translates into our dollars and volume. One important point about snacking, though, that was really counterintuitive to all of us across Circana who took a look at this data. We break snacks in the infinite world of snacks, which includes a lot of fresh foods, by the way, into savory, sweets, and better for you. And we look at the average eating per capita, or essentially the frequency of consumption over time. We do see, despite all those lofty, I want to eat healthier aspirations, better for you actually has started to decline. And I can tell you that underneath that, a lot of those fruits I talked about earlier and vegetable snacks declined a lot with it. Now, diving deeper, and I'm being generalistic here, there was different findings for each of these in various products that are kind of represented on this call, but ultimately price, availability, and relevance. There is just more snacks in your face and available that are better or sweet or savory often than fresh. I think it's getting the relevancy and availability together that will really help us continue to not lose ground in the snacking game to center store. So this is a quick summary slide, and what we really want to take away in how we eat and cook is that it is different today. It is very, very different, and it is absolutely not necessarily automatic that fresh wins, even though we could sit here all day and tell you about how convenience and health and snacking and indulgence and all the top trends in fresh are still very relevant. If we don't capitalize on it, especially with millennials and Gen Zs, who are so different in how they're eating and living, than Xers and Boomers, how are we going to continue to grow fresh well beyond just this next year? And I bring up the example of meal kits. We all thought that meal kits were going to be the answer to everyone's prayers. What we learned is that people actually like to pick which can of tomatoes and which other type of part of the recipe they do. So how do we deliver an experience that shows them a whole solution without forcing them to buy just the ingredients that we have? It's a good example of how we can play into the need and not just solve with the most immediate idea. So Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit more deeply about how we're shopping, specifically what fresh foods are actually growing and declining?
Thank you, Jonna. So we want to look at kind of the three main growth levers that affect the volume sales that we see. The main things here are the buyers who purchase our products purchasing? Are there more of them purchasing today than yesterday? Are they shopping more frequently? Are they spending more per transaction? And what we have on this slide here is quantifying the impact of these buyer frequency and spending changes into the dollar impact compared to 2019. And over the last 4 years, spending has become the dominant growth factor across all fresh departments. And this is primarily due to price. And because these growth levers are interconnected, that the general dynamic is that as price or the cost per transaction increases, it tends to diminish buyer and frequency gains. And that's because a consumer's wallet has finite spending power. There is no more additional money to be had. So once people are stretched, they're starting to make choices. Now, we think there's a great opportunity for fresh departments because, as we've talked about, there's a lot more value to be realized beyond price. Take, for example, produce, which has seen meaningful dollar trip growth over the last 4 years that can be attributed to more frequent trips. And why is this so significant? It connects back to that desire not to be wasteful. Consumers are trying to make the most of all the products that reach their home, especially as it's potentially costing upwards of 25% more than 2019. And I will say, I had a good chuckle earlier this week when I was looking online, and I came across a little meme with a clickbait kind of news lead, and it said, millennials and Gen Zers are using much of their spending power to fuel short-term purchases like groceries and vacations. I kind of thought it was an odd juxtaposition to kind of say groceries and short-term investments is odd language. But it's not completely false, even though it's funny, because grocery bills are so high and they do stack up that it does impact our future ability to spend and to save and plan for the future. Now, consumers aren't powerless to make other choices, whether that's choosing different products, but they can also choose where they spend their money when they shop. And what we are seeing here is that traditional grocery is ceding fresh sales to their retail rivals within mass and superstores, independent and specialty outlets. And these stores have done a great job since the pandemic of really further solidifying their footprint within fresh. And certainly price is an aspect that has brought these consumers to these outside channels, but it's the emerging value matrix that keeps them coming back. Consumers have discovered quality products, great shopping experiences that are relevant and convenient for their lifestyles. That's what's helping to keep these shares where they're at, especially as we note that mass and superstores are up over 1.2 points compared to 2019. That's a significant gain in terms of the dollar sale that we're speaking to. As well, we are seeing certain fresh categories fare far better in the non-grocery outlets. And this is a huge part down to who is shopping. Who are our fresh shoppers outside of the grocery store? They are primarily under 40, and that kind of is reflected in some of these choices. Take, for example, avocados and deli hummus. They're doing especially well in club stores. And part of this is because, the larger pack sizes that are available in club offer a lot of value, and they feel like there's less risk because they eat differently. The hummus and avocados are both a meal and a snack option, and they're likely being consumed by the entire family. And as we think about it, channel shifting is not the only way that consumers are rethinking how they are shopping for fresh food. Just keep in mind, 40% of price-concerned shoppers, of which there are many, are cutting back on non-essentials. That is up nearly 10 points last year. That is a significant sentiment shift. Which brings us back to we're going to be making tough choices, which impact are frequency and buyer levers of growth. So let's take a look here compared to 2019 of which categories are winning and losing the most. So as we think about it from a buyer perspective, categories that really deliver on the value matrix stand tallest and benefit the most from these new buyer gains. For example, let's look at deli, sushi, and perimeter cupcakes. These are areas that tend to rival other food service options that are out there. And because we are seeing within retail that they are delivering quality products, great purchase experiences, that is helping to convert people and keep them in the retail space. Now take deli, grab-and-go turkey. This is all about delivering convenience. Consumers for a long time resisted and believed that grab-and-go was not as fresh and was not to their personal preferences. However, consumers have come around and now accept deli grab-and-go as a clear and easy replacement for waiting in line for behind-the-glass products. Chicken overall, whether it's fresh chicken thighs or deli entrees, has done extremely well here in this post-pandemic environment in both by being a versatile and affordable protein. And it really has benefited a lot from the beef pricing that's been happening in the landscape. On the flip side, if we look at those that have not fared as well in terms of buyers, we are seeing significant changes. When prices are high, consumers are going to explore those alternatives to fulfill that need. And the challenge that faces these categories is that it's hard to bring these buyers back. Beef, whether ground or steak, is being replaced with chicken. Counter service in our deli is always seeing that shift over to grab and go. And how do you make these products complementary and not cannibalize as much is kind of the look to the future. As well, if we look at meat, cheese, and cracker kits, I mean, this was a darling all the way leading from 2015 onwards. However, as consumers remain at home and working in that space, they are more comfortable sorting out products from their own pantry and refrigerators to make their own charcuterie boards. There's a lot more value to be realized there. So how do you win with these consumers again? It's about understanding what aspects of value matter most to these key shopper groups. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. For example, with millennials, this might have to be some digital shelf investments, offering shoppable digital recipes to remind them about the versatility and convenience of ground beef and recipes. For older shoppers, this might be rethinking how you approach in-store, offering more features or displays to bring that attention and awareness back. And more than likely, there's certainly going to be an element of promotion, but we have some more detail going into that further in the deck. The other factor we looked at here is frequency. Frequency is a key component to expanding that volume and expanding consumption. Berries and deli sushis, they are going to be a little bit of a darling here. They have been very successful in growing both buyers and expanding trips over the last 4 years. And really, a lot of what this comes down to is these categories are that affordable indulgence. You're looking and saying it's worth it to spend a little bit more to get these items, and it makes them happy and it provides delight. Ground beef is an interesting contradiction because we just talked about the fact is that they have lost some buyers, but they're making up some of that loss via growth in occasions. Beef still is that staple, and ground beef really is that easy to prepare option, but to include for meals to stretch it and bring that satiety to your family. And satiety is kind of a trend throughout all of these. Think about fresh potatoes, chicken breast, pork dinner sausage. All these things are great ways to help fill up your families and keep them full and not have to fuss too much with it. And it's easy really for these products to maintain a place on the shopping list and make it its way into the cart when you recognize that the value of the products is being realized. Now, if we look at products that are doing less well, price is really a significant factor behind these occasion losses, particularly as we look at fresh crab and fresh shrimp. Deli salads, it's been a bit more of a struggle. They have lost both buyers and trips since 2019. And I think what's interesting here is that it should be a convenient option because you're taking something, you're already cutting it up, you're already adding the ingredients. It should be an easy, play with the consumer, but it's not doing as well. So what's not resonating? Is it something about the category mix, the flavors? Are we missing something generationally that could be tapped further into? Is there a health halo, essentially, that we should be looking at? And perimeter pies is interesting because of its fighting for everyday and celebratory occasions across products in its own department, like cakes and cupcakes, as well as it's going against baking mixes that are fairly affordable and turnkey. and other food service options. I think to drive occasions, it's important to remind consumers about the positive experiences and potentially incent them to come back one more time. However, it's always a cautious line to walk when doing promotional deals. Often to keep people coming back, you want to make sure that it's available and it's incentive, but you don't want to subsidize everyday purchases. And as we look at the deals that are out there, deal seeking remains elevated for consumers. John spoke to it, and it also come back around. Consumers are so sensitive to price still, and they are basically offering up the sentiment, providing feedback to manufacturers and to retailers that they are on the lookout for more and better deals. And this sentiment has been on the rise since 2022, up nearly 13 points since then. And it's not to say that promotional deals aren't out there. Promotional levels are slowly returning, but we had not yet fully rallied to 2019 levels, only with the exception of seafood, where we'll be able to see that they are exceeding the promotional levels of the past. However, we should note that there's double-digit price increases that they're combating. So they are using promotions to drive trips or help buoy trips. And we're not advocating to just simply increase promotions. It's really about thinking about what is the right mix of tactics that is going to deliver promotional lifts. So as we look across our fresh departments in the grocery channel, what we are seeing here is that promotional lifts are returning, particularly for the most expensive departments. Think our center store proteins and our seafood. But it is critical to keep in mind. It's critical to keep in mind that it might be a winning formula to kind of give consumers what they want when they say they want more deals, but that will not provide that long-term impact or change the out-of-store demand factors that are pressuring down on retailers. The key to success is really about strategic planning that leverages a full portfolio of tactics tailored to activate with the trends that matter and the audiences that matter most to your business.
So as Kelly and I were putting this together, and I just want to compliment Kelly, who's come into the Top Trends and Fresh family and worked with me on this, and there's been some incredible deep dive conversations and passion about so much of this across our team, and especially between Kelly and I. One of the things that we've noticed is that every time we do Top Trends and Fresh, we talk about, you just saw berries appear as a category in both the most frequent and increased buyers. And it's really been one of the categories. By the way, chicken is also one that we talk a lot about. But when it comes to berries, what was really interesting to me is that we've definitely seen them gain share, volume, frequency, buyers, and sales, not just during the pandemic. If we go back actually in the last decade, berries have continued to grow. But what was interesting when we stopped last year and looked at berries with just our retail data, we noticed that because berries have become such a growth driver, especially for the fresh foods industry and the produce department, traditional grocers are now promoting something from the berry category almost every single week. And I wrote a blog on Circana.com about berries specifically if you want to check it out from last year. But it was exactly what Kelly was talking about, right? Where of course, when something's more frequent and it's growing, we're promoting it more to try to drive that foot traffic and bring back lost shoppers, especially in traditional grocery channels, who are being hurt by everyday low prices at grocery, or being hurt by the treasure hunt of club or specialty. Berries became that thing, and so in essence, everyone's promoting this, and if everyone has it and everyone's selling more of it, what really is it doing? So because I've studied berries at length, I really wanted to go a step further beyond the retail data and use berries as an example of what I think we're ultimately getting to with today's webinar. We know berries in and of itself and the drivers of it, but if we want to potentially get deeper with consumers on what is this demand driving, because it is unique, right? We're not necessarily just suddenly pricing berries differently and driving volume. We're not suddenly, there's no TikTok trend necessarily related directly to berries. So we wanted to take a look at the consumption to complete this, why are berries growing? And I'm using berries as an example, but frankly, we could do this for any food, any region that's growing or declining. Now, this consumption data, there was a lot to look at, but I just wanted to summarize some of the key highlights for you. Where berries were consumed in 2023, we definitely saw that breakfast was a sizable component of how consumers who buy berries are eating and using berries in their homes and in their lives. In fact, berries are more than 1.2 times, actually they're almost 2 times more likely to be eaten at breakfast than any other fresh fruit. Now, lunch and between meal snacking is down, but between meal snacking is kind of the other yin of breakfast is yang. What's also interesting about breakfast is as we've looked a little bit across data, what people are doing at breakfast is actually changing. Different things like smoothies and oatmeal and, fruit cups. Berries are relevant in each of those eating occasions. And so as people move more to those breakfast foods, berries came along with them. That information really shows why the demand is what it is and why berries continue to be relevant. And the quality of berries is that they are snackable and fresh and literally in the front of almost every produce department now. So then it became a who question. Who are we seeing who are eating more than their fair share of berries in comparison to other fruits? And what we found is that children and their moms, or specifically females who are 25 to 34, are really a huge part of the berry growth story. In fact, people in those demographic cohorts are more likely to consume berries more than any other fruit. Now, on the flip side, berries still have room to grow. Adults who are more of the baby boomer generation, as well as teens, are actually under consuming berries compared to other fruits. Now, these are just 3 different stats from an infinite amount of eating trends that we looked at with berries. But what they point to is that need to understand who is consuming them, how are they using them, what else are they doing and eating, and inform some of our price promotion display strategies with some of that insight. So ultimately, at the end of the day, for a quick summary and wrap up here, we have to recognize that in how we shop, grocery, traditional supermarkets do not automatically win fresh food sales. And continually, price is the lens of the prism with which we're reviewing things. Now, across channels, we did see some fresh foods that, despite inflation, are increasing buyers and frequency. So the question I'm often asked is, why is insert category X or retailer Y down? But ultimately, all of our work, which we can do in a multi-viewed way, really does point to the need to understand that essential question of relevancy, quality, and those dimensions of value that Rick mentioned. Price promotion we tagged at the end here, but it's a critical piece. What we're doing in this industry is trying to drive shopping behavior by doing price discounts. And I am here to tell you, as Kelly showed, that's not a bad thing when price is the number one thing that we need. But what we really could do in Fresh to help ourselves even more is take a page out of the CPG book. Really understand why you're doing this promotion, what benefit and incrementality is it giving you, and instead of just recycling your calendar of price promotion from a year ago, because maybe that worked in 2019, I hope what you saw today shows there's a whole new world out there, and what you did before may not help us. And this picture on the right here was actually an ad that I was served. Aldi is a new entrant in the Phoenix market, and I received this ad. And it was, of course, over Super Bowl. And, of course, I was inundated with food ads and circulars that were touting game day favorites. And here's what's so interesting about all these pricing strategies here in Phoenix during this past Super Bowl. 25% off of the most delicious and must-have. They literally went across department lines, across owner lines, across what have you, and had a 25% off the most popular items, and some of those were fresh, and some of those were frozen, and some of those were a lot of different things. Simple, effective, because now I didn't have to decide who I was buying where for what for a Super Bowl party. I knew that Aldi became a destination for game day favorites. Super simple, super relevant. By the way, I didn't go to Aldi for the game day because I didn't actually have a Super Bowl party. But to me, it really resonated with everything Kelly shared. So I just want to pull this slide up as we wrap up and give some upcoming notes. As I mentioned, this honestly was Kelly Krumholz's idea, and I think it is absolutely what we're going to talk about throughout this year in Top Trends and Fresh. The trends we discovered way back in 2015 are still relevant today. Arguably, at this very moment in February, affordability and fresh prepared and convenience are having a little bit of a moment. But as you saw, so was premiumization, health, connected consumer, or digital. All of these are still relevant. How we view them is this or isn't this a trend? It's what are we going to do now that we know that it is. And so I do want to let you know that on May 16th will be our next installment of Top Trends in Fresh. Our current plan, that can always be changed based on your feedback, is to get more deeply into the consumers that are under invested and have opportunity to grow in fresh and look at them from this prism lens of the top trends in fresh. I really do personally think that how we show up to different consumers in different ways is a big key to growth. With that, I do want to wrap up today's webinar by thanking Rick Stein for continuing to be our awesome sponsor and advisor as we build top trends in fresh, and our partnership with FMI is continuing to be as strong as ever. And also thank Kelly Krumholtz for being my co-presenter today and the excellent work that she did in analyzing. And just again, to remind you, this deck will be available for download as well as this recording in about a day following today's webinar. So thank you all for joining us today. I have answered all the questions in the chat. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to us at contact us at Circana.com. And if you'd love to know more, please reach out. One last thing I just want to say here is we've worked really hard in this fresh foods practice as well as across Circana to make data, like on that picture there, easy, effective, and affordable. So if you've always wondered, hey, I can't afford data, please reach out to us. We'd love to help you. And also, if you'd love to learn more about more than just retail POS data, we're also here for you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you on May 16th. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.